There are a lot of crime movies about cops chasing robbers. There's a lot of movies about professional criminals pulling off impossible heists. And then there's Heat. Heat isn't about cops and robbers. It's about two guys basically living the same life on opposite ends of the law. One is Vincent Hanna, played by Al Pacino. The other is Neil McCauley, played by Robert Niro. And the crazy part is neither one of them know how to live a normal life. So today let's break down why Heat is still one of the best crime movies ever made. And why Michael Mann's 1995 classic feels so much more personable than your average crime movie. Right from the beginning, Heat tells you what kind of movie you're watching. Neil McCauley and his crew are professionals. They aren't reckless criminals running around looking for trouble. They plan everything. They know the schedules, they know the exits. They know how long they have, and most importantly, they know that one little mistake can get them killed. Neil lives by one simple rule. Never get attached to anything that you ain't willing to walk away from in 30 seconds if you feel the heat around the corner. And that line basically explains the entire character. Neil doesn't just avoid emotional attachment, he avoids anything that could slow him down. A house, a relationship, a family, a future. Everything is temporary. His entire life is built around the idea that he should always be ready to leave. And honestly, that's what makes Neil such an interesting character. He's disciplined, intelligent, calm, but he's also completely alone. Then you have Vincent Hanna, and on the surface, Vincent couldn't be more different. He's a cop, he's loud, he's intense, he's unpredictable. He throws himself completely into his work. But underneath all that, he's basically doing the same thing Neil is. He's also obsessed. He's obsessed with catching criminals instead of being one. And that's where the movie gets really interesting. Because Vincent's job is destroying his personal life, in almost exactly the same way Neil's criminal lifestyle destroys his. His marriages don't work, his relationships don't work, he's constantly distracted, he's always thinking about the next case. Even when he's at home, he's not really at home. His mind is somewhere else, and that's the connection between these two characters. They both have something they're incredibly good at, and they're both willing to sacrifice almost anything else to do it. The movie makes this connection very obvious whenever Vincent and Neil finally meet face to face. And instead of immediately trying to kill each other, they sit down and actually have a conversation. It's one of the most memorable scenes in the entire movie. Because for a few minutes, the cop and criminal ain't really enemies. They're professionals talking to another professional. Vincent understands Neil, and Neil understands Vincent. They recognize the obsession in each other. And that's what makes the scene work. They aren't friends, and they aren't exactly enemies in that moment either. They're two guys that understand the rules of the game, and they both know that eventually those rules are going to put them against each other. But while Vincent and Neil are fascinating, Heat is also about what happens to everyone around them. And this is where the movie gets much more emotional than sometimes people remember. Look at Neil and Edie. Neil actually starts to form a relationship with her. And for someone like Neil, that's a huge deal. Because Edie represents something that he doesn't normally allow himself to have, a future. She isn't part of his criminal world. She doesn't care about his scores or his crew. She just sees him as a person. And for a moment, it looks like Neil might actually choose a different life. And then his past catches up with him. And that's the tragedy of Neil McCauley. He gets the opportunity to walk away, but he can't completely let go of the person he's built himself into. Vincent has the exact opposite problem. His obsession with the job is destroying his relationship. He cares about his wife, but he can't give her the attention that she needs. He cares about his stepdaughter, but his job constantly pulls him away. And there's something almost sad about watching Vincent choose criminals while his own life is falling apart. He's successful at his job, but he's failing at everything outside of it. And that makes him the perfect mirror image of Neil. Neil can't have a normal life because he's committed to being a criminal. Vincent can't have a life because he's committed to catching people like Neil. Different sides, same obsession. And then we get the robbery. This is where Heat goes from being a great crime drama to absolute insanity. The bank robbery is super intense, but things completely fall apart when the cops show up. And what follows is one of the most famous shootouts in film history. And what makes it so effective is it doesn't feel clean. It doesn't feel like an action movie where everyone has unlimited ammunition and no one is scared. It feels chaotic. The gunfire is deafening. People are running everywhere, cars are getting destroyed, and suddenly the carefully planned robbery becomes a fight to survive. Neil and his crew aren't superheroes, and police aren't casually walking towards them either. The whole scene feels like a war breaking out in the middle of Los Angeles. Michael Mann's decision to make the gunfire sound so powerful is a huge reason the scene still holds up today. But the movie doesn't just use violence for entertainment. Almost every major action scene changes the characters. After the shootout, Neil's world starts collapsing. His crew is disappearing, his options are getting smaller, and the police are getting closer. Vincent is closing the net. But Vincent isn't exactly winning either. The closer he gets to Neil, the more his own life starts falling apart. So the movie keeps asking the same question. How much are these guys willing to sacrifice to win? And the answer is basically everything. And then there's Chris. Chris might be one of the most overlooked characters in the movie. He's Neil's right-hand man, but his personal life is a disaster. His relationship with Charlene is falling apart. He's gambling. He's making reckless decisions. Unlike Neil, he actually wants a family. He wants a normal life. That's what makes his story so important. Chris is caught between the criminal life and the life he actually wants. And eventually he has to choose, is he willing to lose everything? His escape near the end of the movie is one of the most tense sequences in the film. Because at that point, you actually care if he makes it out. And then we get to Neil's final decision. After everything that happens, Neil finally gets a chance to leave. He can disappear, he can start over, he can go somewhere else with Edie. And for 1 second, it seems like he might actually do it. But then he makes one final mistake. He goes after Waingro. And that's where Neil's entire philosophy comes back to bite him. He couldn't let go, he needed revenge. And by going back, he gives Vincent exactly what he needs. A chance to find him. And that leads to the final chase. The ending of Heat is one of the best in any crime movie, in my opinion. Neil is running through the airport, Vincent is chasing him. There's almost no dialogue, just two men finally reaching the end of their journey. And when Vincent finally catches Neil, it doesn't feel like some victory. It feels sad, because Vincent has spent the entire movie chasing this guy. Now that he's finally caught him, there's nothing really left. Neil is dying, the case is over, and Vincent is still Vincent. His obsession hasn't magically fixed his life. He hasn't suddenly become a better person, he just won. And that's it. That's why the final moment between Vincent and Neil is so powerful. Vincent holds Neil's hand, and for a brief moment, the cop and criminal aren't on opposite sides anymore. They're just two exhausted human beings. Two guys who have spent their entire lives chasing something. And now it's over. Neil dies knowing that the one person who truly understood him was the man who's been haunting him the entire time. It's a strangely beautiful ending for such a violent movie. And I think that's the biggest reason Heat has lasted this long. It's not really about robberies, it's not really about shootouts. It's not even really about cops versus criminals. It's about obsession. It's about what happens when you become so committed to one thing that everything else in your life becomes secondary. Neil chooses his criminal life, Vincent chooses his career. Chris struggles to choose between crime and his family. And almost everyone in the movie is dealing with the consequences of those choices. That's what makes Heat feel different. These characters aren't just moving the plot forward, they're destroying their own lives because they can't stop being who they are. And that's a lot more interesting than simply just watching a cop catch a criminal. Heat also feels real because Michael Mann takes the time to let these characters exist outside of the action. They're eating, they're arguing, they're talking, they're going to work, they're sitting in restaurants, they're dealing with relationships, and then suddenly everything explodes. That contrast makes the action hit harder, because we understand what these people actually have to lose. And that's why 30 years later, Heat still feels so damn good. It's stylish without being empty. It's violent without making violence the entire point. Most importantly, it gives you characters that you can understand, even when they're making terrible decisions. Neil and Vincent are basically two sides of the same coin. One wears a badge, one carries a gun. But both of them live by the same code. Do the job, stay focused, never hesitate, and never let anything get in the way. Until eventually, something does. And that's what makes Heat more than just a crime movie. And what makes Heat still hold up. Okay, so if you like this movie breakdown, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.